Okay, hi everybody. For our second Women HIV and Health Research Program and Women-Centered HIV Care Hub summer research teaching session. And we're going to talk about steps of research. Um, and so if you have a project at any stage, if you're working on a research project at any stage, or there's a research project that you want to do, I want you to think about it right now. And I want you to think about this presentation um, with that project in mind and figure out where you're at in your project, what you need to do, what you've done, and what you've learned from this project or in this presentation that maybe you didn't think about and now that you're going to do. So let's get started. So I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across Turtle Island. Okay, just a little refresher from last week. Last week we went over what is research, um, and um, and I summarize it as an activity of creating knowledge or creating new knowledge. But a lot of the time, the knowledge is not new. So it's actually expanding knowledge, um, uh, uh, packaging knowledge that's already there in a different way so that it can be presented to other people. And typically, everybody who's here we do research to improve the lives of humans, animals, the planet, the universe in general, and really, and I'm sure everybody on this call and in this teaching session is interested in improving the lives that we live and that of others, and really that, and we call that social justice research. Now, when you think about your research project, so I've asked you to think about your research project, and um, and actually we're going to use one of our uh, one of our groups research project as an example. So, so Asha, is it okay for you to tell us about your research project? And we're going to use Asha's research project as an example.
Yeah, so my research project is called HOPE, which stands for Harnessing Opportunity for Progress Through Lived Experience. And what I'm hoping it could be is because I'm in the beginning stages of it, is a community led research initiative that focuses on African Caribbean Black, so that's ACB, individuals in Ontario who acquired HIV perinatally or during childhood. So anywhere, if they acquired HIV anywhere from 0 to 16 years old, Hope will be centered on their voices, amplifying their experiences, and driving systematic change, hopefully, in health HIV care for these individuals. So that's like a high level, like summary of like what and why I'm doing it a little bit. I can also talk about like what I'm hoping to like get from all of this, like question wise, like so I want to know what the lived experiences are for them, what are some of the systematic barriers, and then what are the healthcare needs of these individuals, and then like what was it like growing up with HIV, and like how has that impacted them throughout their lives. So kind of just like I'm looking at that, but also I like the big overarching thing that I'm hoping to do is do like qualitative interviews, just talking about these things and having them talk about what it is that their experiences, And then following that up with like a storytelling, illustrative storytelling storybook project. And that's like a way of like, it's a creative way, it's culturally responsive way of presenting our findings, basically, and having them own their stories. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Asha. That's a great project to use as an example. And we're not going to talk about this today, but we could in another session, which is the beginning part of working on a research project is actually spending some time really thinking about the context of the research question and the topic. What is the context? So Asha, your context is really in Canada, right? And also, but could have impact internationally, and even more sort of context of what is the context of the lives of those youth. Um, um, and do you see how that's important to think about context?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know I was being muted. I was muted.
Yeah, and then we're not going to go in details now, but if you do a graduate degree, um, for your master's or PhD project, or if you're submitting a grant, it would be expected for you to use research frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to go over that today. But Asha, I don't know in your grant if you put in what frameworks you're going to use.
Yeah, I did. Let me just give me a sec.
And while you're looking that up, so as an example, for the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub, the framework that we use are the uh, um, uh, cultural responsiveness framework. We use intersectionality. We use an intersectional feminism. We use community-based research
Mm-hmm.
as frameworks. We use social justice as a framework, anti-oppression and anti-racism as frameworks. So, and there's also there's other frameworks that can be used. The social ecologic model is a
Mm-hmm.
framework that can be used in research. How about you, Asha?
So yeah, I found it. So I used critical race theory as one of the frameworks, intersectionality framework, resilience theory, sorry, and community-based participation, participatory. I can't speak today. Sorry, you guys. Research. So the community-based participatory research
Yeah.
framework, like methodology, like the backbone of it.
Okay. Thanks so
Oh,
much.
I also use the art-based research for the creative methodology.
Um, and uh, and spending time reflecting on the context and the frameworks and how you're going to apply them to your project, and
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly reflecting, are these the right frameworks? Are you applying these frameworks in a meaningful way to the work that you're doing? So we're not going to go through that in detail today, but just something for all of you to think about. Okay, so this is the big picture. 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 main steps of research. The first step is getting grants. So applying for grants. And you need to apply for grants because you need funding. You need money to do your research project. You need the money to hire your staff. You need the money to create your databases. You need the money, for example, to do the transcriptions if you're doing interviews. You need the money for your participants, for your community research associates, for the training. So really you can't do anything without the funding. So we're going to go over how to get grants. Then then you get your funding and you have to run your project. You have to implement your project. So step 2 is project implementation. And then the third step is knowledge dissemination. So you finished your project, and how are you going to disseminate the findings? And the most traditional avenues of dissemination in the academic world are peer-reviewed manuscripts. Um, uh, and really they're the currency of academic research. So historically, the motto was publish or perish. And while that's changing, it's still very true in the university and academic world, in terms of, like, for example, we have some grad students here. You want to make sure that you publish your master's or PhD um, dissertations. Uh, and then actually having publications on your resume or CV are important for the next steps of your career. And we have a talk on how to write a manuscript that we can do at a later date also. Conference abstracts are an important form of knowledge dissemination. And I'm sure many of you have gone to CAR, the Canadian Association of HIV Research Conference. But I will say that there's like an important point on a resume or CV, which is that it's very important that if you have a conference abstract, you also have to follow that up with the publication, so that when you have your CV, it's not just all full with conference abstracts, and that the reviewers can actually see that you actually work on a project, you present the conference abstract, and you get the peer-reviewed manuscript. Right now, we also in today's world, social media is essential as a form of knowledge dissemination. We love community forums, which we haven't done in a while, but I'd love to do one again. Workshops, presenting at what we call rounds, which are like at the university or at hospitals or in clinics. We would be invited at lunchtime to present. Those are different forms of and more of knowledge dissemination. And we're not going to talk a lot about knowledge dissemination today. We're mainly going to talk about number 1 and 2. And so, Asha, for your project, where are you at of these 3 steps?
So I already got the funding. So I applied for a grant. So I did that. I'm right now in stage 2, which is the project implementation.
Okay, perfect. Well, congratulations, Asha, for getting your grant.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about getting grants. So I'm sure some of you are applying for grants right now. I know at least one of you is. What makes a good grant? So, actually, a good grant starts off with a good research question. And we went over that last week. So, one research question using PICO. So that's considering your population, your intervention, or independent variable. The C is your comparison, and O is outcome, and sometimes we also use PCOT, and the T is time. And for anyone who wasn't there last week, we actually have the session recorded and can share that with you. And don't short yourself on time in terms of really thinking about a good research question. You start with an idea. What really inspires you? What have you seen that inspires you? Or what have you seen that's unjust and you want to do something about it? So that's sort of like the idea, the topic that inspires you. Discuss it with people, brainstorm. A research question should be innovative, impactful, important to the community, and again, concise and clearly following the PCOT requirements. A good grant actually takes time to write, and and it should take at least 6 months typically or longer. So you have your idea, and then next you're going to want to put together your research team. And that's what takes the time, is building a good research team. How many sites are you going to want? Is it national, or is it provincial, or is it just one city? Or if it's one city, is it multiple sites? So you have to think about all those items. Um, and um, and typically what I'll do is we will start with a one-page summary of our grant. So with sort of a little bit of a background, what is the research question? What are the objectives? And all of those actually, research question and objectives actually match. Those are actually different ways to say the same thing. And also another way to say research question, objective is hypothesis. So you can also in your one-page summary and grant, put your hypothesis. And your hypothesis is what you predict is going to happen. So you can actually put all three of those in a research grant, or you can pick one, or often you pick two of them. And so then once you have your one-page summary, you also think about who you want on your team. So we will often put a list together with our dream team, the team that we are hoping will agree, and that'll link by site. Uh, uh, who are the co-investigators going to be, knowledge users, research coordinators, and who do we need to reach out to? Um, uh, and then we'll email them with the invitation to be part of a grant. This is the part that takes time again, to build your research team. And as much as possible, I highly recommend going to meet with people in person. Um, so I'll give you an example. When I'm in any city for a meeting, I will try to have coffee or lunch or dinner with my colleagues, because meeting in person, building those relationships is really important. So some of you, for example, are working with community organizations, and actually going and meeting with them in person is really important. Bring the coffee, bring the cookies to meet with them. Get to know them personally. If people have questions, feel free to stop. Okay, here are some secrets to grant writing. You have to read the instructions carefully. And this also applies for if anyone is applying for graduate student awards. Or actually, even if you're applying to medical school or any sort of application, read the instructions carefully. Respond to the request that is in the grant. What are the objectives that are listed in the grant? Use the wording that are in the grant instructions in your writing. Now, actually, the granting agencies are required to put the listing and identify the scope of what the reviewers will be asked to review based on. That is actually the most important part of instructions, is because they mark the grant, they score your grant. I see there's something in the chat. I'll get to that. But the reviewers score your grant based on those review parameters, which now are in the grant instructions. So those are the most important part of the instructions. And what I do typically is I take those review criteria and I use those for the heading of my grant. Do you see that? To make sure that we're covering those. Okay, now I saw I saw that there was something in the chat, but now I can't get it. Can Asha or Amy, can you read it?
Yeah, it's so what it says is how many people should be part of the team?
Okay, great question. It really depends on the grant. So, and it also really depends on, it really depends on the grant. It depends on, and every investigator has different styles. Like my coordinators don't like me because I like a lot of people on grants. So if you can imagine, the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub had 96 people on that grant. And it makes for a lot of work because you have to get we had to have Zoom meetings with each group of people. We had to, get buy-in, get feedback. You have to then get their CVs. You have to get their signatures. So the more people you get, the harder it is. But in a lot of ways for a grant, the more people you have, the better. So, and so I think like as many as possible, but you also have to be strategic in terms of who you want on your grant. So each province, for example, if you're doing a multi-provincial or multi-site, you're going to want an investigator from each site. Now it's very important to have community members on grants. So then you're going to want a community member representative from each province or site. And then CIHR, for example, has knowledge users. So, and really thinking about like, who is a knowledge user? Is it a community member? Is it a community-based organization? So being strategic about having people from every region or every site and the different types of people on the grant is important. So there's some grants. So for example, we're submitting a CIHR planning and dissemination grant, and you don't need as many people on those grants as, for example, like a project grant. And then other items to think about, a lot of CIHR grants require people with lived or living experience on grants. They require early career researchers on grants. They require, you have to think about whether you're going to have Indigenous colleagues on your grants, as well as policymakers. So that's like another, another group of people for you to consider to have on your grant. And now you often have to, in CIHR grants, make participant tables where you have the person and you specify their role and their activity. So each person really, needs to have a role on the grant. Are they bringing knowledge? Are they going to actually provide a skill or do something? And then also, each level of team member has different responsibility. So if someone comes on as a co-PI, they're really responsible for the deliverables of that grant. If they're which is co-principal investigator. If they are a co-investigator, they are also responsible, but less so. And if someone doesn't have a lot of time, they can come on as a collaborator. So for the Tweary Community Advisory Board, we actually did a session on submitting CIHR grants. We could do that for all of you also. This is just more of an interview. I hope that answers your question. The proposal, so you with your writing your grant, there's an application typically, and that's usually done online. So you'll fill in the application with the title, the institution that's getting the funding, there's always only one nominated principal applicant. That's the one getting the money. And then you'll have to fill in a summary on that application typically, but your main document is what's called a proposal. You will be writing a proposal. And typically a proposal for a grant is some of them are 5 pages, more typically they're 10 pages, and in some circumstances they're 13 or 15 pages. So we're going to talk more about how to write a proposal. Knowing who your audience is when you write your proposal is key. So if you're submitting to the CIHR project grant, which is just like a general stream, your reviewers are going to be people like, like epidemiologists or like doctors, like endocrinologists or cardiologists. So like they don't know a lot about HIV. So you have to spin the story. You're telling a story in your grant of what the topic is, why it's important, what's the gap and what gap you're filling and why it's so important and impactful. And so the wording you use for your proposal, it is different depending on what granting agency you're applying to. So if it's a general CIHR, which is the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the main federal funding body, you know, you're gonna write to people who don't know a lot about HIV. But like in Asha's grant, she was applying to the Ontario HIV Treatment Network. That's a group who does know more about HIV. So you're going to be writing your grant differently. Um, so, um, so think about who your audience is. For early career researchers, or if you haven't been on a review panel for a grant or you're offered to be on one, I would do it. It's really interesting to be on the other side because then it helps your grant writing. Again,
I,
start early, at least 4 to 5 months, if not even 6 to 12 months before. And starting early is respectful to your team. You know, you don't want to be sending proposals last minute for your other team members to be reviewing. Um, um, you want to be respectful, sending proposals like like a couple of months ahead if possible, at least a month. Yes, I see a.
it's me.
Okay,
I have a
yes,
question.
yes.
So when you said like if you're given the opportunity to be part of a review panel, do it. What's the qualification? Because you mentioned that for the CIHR, the review panelists are like epidemiologists, doctors. So what other requirements you can be part of a review
Yeah.
panel?
Yeah. So for example, CIHR has I don't know if you know, but CIHR has dedicated funding for HIV research um, from the federal government. And so and that dedicated funding there is like a whole pool of funding that goes to HIV community-based research. So that project grant, that stream I was telling you about, the review panels are academic scientists, yes, but there's other pools of funding that where community members are actually required to be reviewers. And so if you're interested in being a reviewer, you could, you know, I can even let you know who to email at CIHR. So, and that would be under the HIV community-based research grant
Okay.
panel. OHTN, actually, the Ontario HIV Treatment Network requires community members to be reviewing grants.
Okay.
And more
Yeah.
that's actually happening.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The other thing to do is to use examples of previous successful proposals and grants. So that's when it's nice to have friends and ask them for their proposals and grants and ask them, can I look at your grant to see what was successful, what worked? And then often what we'll do to write a grant proposal is we'll split up, like we'll do a skeleton and then we'll split up the different parts for each of us to write it, and then we'll put it together. Again, start with your one-pager summary, start with your team list, and then also I actually like, before I write the full proposal, I like to start with the budget because you have to know how much money you have and how far that money is going to go before you write your proposal in terms of what you're going to do. Because you could if you write your proposal first, you could have all these plans of all these great things you want to do. And then if you leave your budget for last, you just don't, you know, you don't have the funding to do all of that. So then you have to rewrite your proposal. So for example, we have a meeting on Monday for TWERI, which stands for the Trans Women and Gender Diverse People's HIV and STBBI and Health Research Initiative, TWERIs. We have a grant going in, and we have a budget meeting on Monday before we write the proposal in more detail. And then we're going to go over the budget, and then for TWERI, we'll be ready to write the proposal in more detail. So here, and now the proposal writing for your grant. And there's a distinction, okay, between writing a proposal is for a grant. It's to get funding. It like you're proposing your project. So it's a proposal and of what you're going to do. Once you get the funding, it's not, you don't submit the proposal to your research ethics board. You actually have to convert your proposal to a protocol in terms of what you're going to do. Okay, so there's a distinction between a proposal and a protocol. They're very similar, but there is a style difference. When you write a proposal, you are trying to sell something because you're trying to get funding. So, and there's going to be other applicants. So you're trying to sell how great your idea is, how important it is, how great the team is that you put together, how the timeline is going to be effective, like you're going to be able to finish the work you're going to do, and you're going to be able to present at conferences and publish and have impact. So you're really telling a story and selling why your project is the most important and is the one to fund. So and that sort of selling part really goes into the introduction and background of why the research is important. Again, we already spoke about the objectives and hypothesis, and you should have one primary objective and hypothesis, and then the rest are secondary. What's the rationale for your project? Again, we talked about frameworks. And then what you can see here is PICO starts to come out in the different sections for your proposal writing. What's the study population? And then what's your study design and procedures? What's your outcomes? What are your other variables, independent variables, comparators that you're interested in? Then you'd have your statistical analysis section or your qualitative analysis section, team description, ethical considerations, knowledge, translation, exchange plans, next steps, future plans, and impact. We often put a section right in the proposal of why our proposal fits with the grant call. These are all tips, and also proposals can be, written with other sort of headings also. I think from the last talk I gave for PICO, I went over a lot about how really thinking about your outcome and what is very important, and your outcome matches your objectives. Okay, I think this is the last slide I have about grants. So your one-pager summary must be flawless, because you can imagine the reviewers of your grant, they're reading your grant proposal and application in front of Netflix, or like watching Netflix in the background, or they're on a plane, they're busy. So a lot of times the main document that they read is your one-page summary. So that has to be excellent. And then now grants, if you can imagine, the CIHR project grant success rate is 13 to 18%. That is such bad odds that like normally I wouldn't apply, because it's basically like 1 in 15 chance that you're going to get funded. So actually it's now when you write a grant to CIHR, your whole grant has to be flawless. And one really important tip is consistency. So everything has to be consistent through the whole grant, because inconsistencies are really red flags for reviewers. New researchers, so whoever wants to be an academic researcher, you should aim for a CIHR grant. So even, I know we have some master students and on the call, man, maybe you want to do a PhD, but applying for a CIHR graduate student degree awards is important. The more CIHR grants you can have on your CV, the better. So, okay, I'm gonna skip that one CIHR tip there. And again, when I did this slide presentation for the first time, like maybe 5-10 years ago, the success rate was 15 to 20%. Now it's 13 to 18%. And really the big picture, and I'm not going to go over this a lot, but the big picture, if you want to be a researcher and have a research program, you're running a small business because you have staff. Like, so for example, I have amazing and excellent staff, but I want to keep them, right? So what you're going to see is that these 3 big steps of research, getting the funding, implementing the project, doing the knowledge dissemination, are a continuous cycle to keep your research staff and keep sort of like your research program business going. And a lot of times, if with a success rate of 13 to 18% for a grant, you're not going to get it the first time. So you have to reapply. And so I'm always thinking 2 to 3 years ahead in terms of applying for the grants to keep the staff down the road. So you always have some of your projects are in this grant writing phase, trying to get funding, and that's really for funding down the road to keep your staff. And then while your staff is implementing the projects and doing the knowledge dissemination. So that's why academic research is busy, because you're actually doing all of these 3 steps of research all the time. Okay, any questions? Because now we're going to move on to, so Asha, this is really where you're at, right? Is the project implementation?
Yep.
Any questions about grant writing? I hope that was useful. And I think it's interesting, for some of you who have been community research associates, you might not know all that goes into getting the grant, right? So it's a different perspective. Okay, Asha, you submitted your grant, right? So Asha was successful with an OHTN Winston Husbands Junior Investigator Award. Congratulations, Asha.
Thank you.
And then, but what happens is when you get a grant, you're very happy you got the grant, yay! But now you have to do the grant and you have to do the work. And it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
So your grant's a little bit different because I think you applied in isolation.
Yeah, so it's funny because you're like, oh, your team and thinking about these things. I was like, there's no team. I'm by myself.
Oh, but I'm wondering whether you should actually think about it like this, right?
Yeah.
Like, think about it like, who is your team? Who do you want on your team?
Yeah.
So think about it and start making a team list and make an invitation for, anyway, just think about it. So right now there's different in implementing a research project, there's different levels of team, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's your core team, right? And the core team tends to meet weekly about the project. And so your core team, I think, Asha or Amy, you and I, right?
Yeah.
But then you'll have your larger team. So who do you want to be on your larger team, right?
Mhm.
Typically, when we get a grant, we have a larger team already. So we would start with a team meeting, like a core team meeting, but you also have to plan your sort of larger team meeting, right? And then I'll also go over with you, Asha, like, do you want to have a community advisory board for your project?
Yeah, I actually wrote that in the my proposal, so I'm definitely doing one.
Okay, and then for a community advisory board, you're going to need a terms of reference.
Yep.
So what, and terms of reference includes what's the objective of the community advisory board? What's the membership? How often are they meeting? And we can go over that more, but think about if you want a community advisory board. Another thing you can do, Asha, is if you don't want like a larger team, like you could have your core team, and then you can have like a small team, not like a larger team. But another thing you can consider doing is item number 8 is having a steering committee. So,
Yeah.
so, and your community advisory board could like you could have 2 different groups, a community advisory board or a steering committee or just one. But just to let you know, when you're doing your project implementation, to think about all these different groups and how do you want to structure them? You have your core team, and then who's your larger team? And your larger team will tend to meet maybe once or twice a year. Same with your CAD. And then a steering committee might meet more often, like once
Mhm.
every 2 months. So these are sort of the different groups. Your community advisory board can also be, like, it doesn't have to only be people with lived and living experience. Your community advisory board can be, you can make the membership, people who are interested and have a stake in youth living with HIV. So it could include like the pediatricians, like it can be more people than just people with lived experience, just to let you know. Okay, but I think, yeah, start thinking about the different teams you want, and you start, and Asha and Amy and I had our first core team meeting today for Asha's project. So that's a good first step, Asha. A lot of times we can't actually get the funding from the granting agency until we have ethics approval. So, and that actually can make it quite hard, because very quickly what we have to do is we have to take the proposal and edit it to become a protocol. And um, then we have to write all the consent forms, the flyers, do the REB application and the cover letter. And that can be quite a lot of work. So if you're, now your grant, Asha, is a little bit different because it's a salary support award.
Yeah.
So I don't think you needed the REB approval to get the funding. So that's quite lucky.
Yeah. Very lucky in that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
thinking about like the research ethics application is important for your project and what we're going to submit. So what I like to do is I like to do a cover letter for the REB application, which is you submit there's like the application, and the cover letter sort of says we're submitting this application and with all of the attachments that need to go to REB. And so you have your protocol that's going to go to REB. And then anything that is going to come in contact with a research participant needs to go to REB. So that's the consent form. That's if you have any baseline demographic surveys. Flyers for recruitment need to go to REB approval. All your surveys. We write scripts. So if we're going to, for recruitment on the phone or by email, we write scripts for for that, then we get those REB approved. So, and the way to think of it is anything that a participant is going to see, you have to put in your REB application. If you don't already have it and you get your funding, you might have to hire staff and students. So you might have to do job postings for that. And sometimes what we have to do is, because there's a delay in getting the research ethics approval, if we don't have staff yet, what I would do is I would do the research protocol and ethics submission and would submit that, or I would have like other staff working on other projects help me with that while we get it into research ethics, because waiting for research ethics approval can take 2 to 3 months. And then if you hire a staff before you get the research ethics in, they might be sitting around with not a lot to do. So we often will submit the research ethics, and then once that's approved, hire the full-time staff on the project. Actually, that made me think about something, Asha. For your project, you have budget to maybe hire a summer student, like next summer.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah. So that it is useful to sort of think of a project going through this talk. Okay. The next thing that I would recommend doing is writing your work plan. And so, and your timeline. So Asha, your project is a 2 years. So think about, I really focus on deliverables. Like, what did I write in my grant to the funding agency that I said I was going to get done? What were the deliverables, the actual deliverables? And look at that, and then the project is 2 years. It ends, let's say it ends April 2027, and then you want these deliverables, and so then go backwards in time to make your timeline and your work plan. I like a fairly detailed work plan, so like with all the sort of small steps that you have to get done to reach your deliverable in 2 years. And you want some leeway in your timeline, because often things take more time. So in your work plan, for example, there might be, who's on your core team. Are you going to have make a cab? Who are they going to be? You have to make your terms of reference. You have to make a posting for your cab. Who's your sort of larger team going to be? Doing the invitations to them. Thinking about, writing your proposal to a protocol, meeting with people. So getting your REB in. When are you going to training? If you're going to do, like, who's going to do all the interviews? Are you going to do all the interviews, Asha? Or are you going to hire other people to help you? Thinking about, students, posting for the students. Anyway, lots to think about in terms of your work plan and timeline.
Yeah. I was gonna say, for my grant, they made me put in a timeline ahead of time, and they were like, be as specific as possible. But I definitely am looking at it now, and I'm like, I will definitely have to change things.
Yeah, so you might have to change things, and usually things take longer than you think. And converting a timeline to a work plan is like, there's whole courses on this, on how to write work timelines and work plans. So and if you haven't done that, some of the WHRP coordinators, or I'm sure ChatGPT, you could put your timeline in ChatGPT to get a head start. But yeah, working on a work plan would be a good next step. Asha? I would say to always aim to have a community advisory board. So it's, it's always helpful. And then something that I do, because I'm trained as a clinical trialist, so doing clinical trials, is to write operations manuals. I don't think this applies as much for your project, Asha, but when you have multiple sites, so for example, for the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub, we have 9 sub-hubs. So we actually have an operations manual for how each sub-hub works and what each coordinator should do. And so actually I think somebody on this teaching sessions from the Quebec sub-hub. So maybe we should touch base about that because we have an operations manual for the sub-hubs. And we could go over that with you as the newest Women-Centered HIV Care sub-hub. So I like to make operations manuals, and especially if there's multiple sites. Regulatory documents is something to consider, again, coming from the clinical trial world and training. It's having a folder on your computer with what we call regulatory documents. So your final protocol, your grant proposal that went in, your REB approval, your any amendments, any, you have to renew your REB every year. So those renewals, the budget, the anything that's sort of regulatory or we put in a folder in one place and to keep that straight. And again, consider a steering committee. Okay, so the first thing to do is to have a core team meeting. And so we did that today, Asha, right? So that was good. And it was fun and it made us excited about your project.
Very excited. Yeah.
And then the next thing is to do your ethics submission and your
Protocol.
And your work plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then and your protocol. Yep, that's the next. So writing your protocol for your research ethics. You would start with your proposal, right? And you can see a lot of the sections are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it's pretty much the same. The main thing I would say is different is that could be different is sometimes, when you write your proposal, it's like you haven't really like thought through things as clearly. When you write your protocol, it's really what's going to happen. And it has to be really practical, really clear, really doable. So for example, your study population is going to have your inclusion exclusion criteria and your recruitment plan, but it might change from your proposal because you've thought about, oh, well, that's not going to be feasible. And this is really the study population that we're going to be working with. Same with your study design and procedures. Your study procedures often have changed from your proposal, or they weren't actually expanded on the proposal. But when you go to write your protocol, this is really where the section that has the most difference is in the protocol is the study procedures, because that's in the protocol, you're going to write out step by step what the procedures are going to be for this research project. Your coordinators at the different sites should be able to go to the study protocol and be able to run the study. And then that's why I also like operations manuals, because then it takes that study procedure and puts it out into even more detail. Your operations manual does not need to go to REB approval, just so that you know. And then you can see here the other sections in the protocol. Very similar, but more detail in the study population and study procedures. Okay, and then I think item number 2 and 3, depending on where you're at in your project or how the funding is, that can be like switched around. So like, for example, for your project, Asha, this step might be like come before the research ethics, which means making up your work plan and timeline, I think is actually your next step ahead of the REB. Okay, Asha?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because you're able to access your funding already.
Mm-hmm.
So spending time really thinking about what you want to do, what your deliverables are, and coming up with your work plan.
Yeah.
And always give yourself extra time because things run late. So even up to a 6 months wiggle room, Asha.
Okay.
And again, think about, forming a community advisory board. And if you haven't yet, this isn't relevant to your project, Asha, but like sometimes, you get funding for a project and then you tell your team that you got funded and then you don't have a team meeting for a long time. It is important to have a larger team meeting as early as possible for once you do get the funding, because it's not nice to have asked all these people to be a part of a grant and send their CVs and do all the work before the grant. Then you get the grant and that's great, but then you don't meet with them again. So having that larger team meeting is important. And usually what we do is we try to have some of the documents ready, like something for the larger team to review at that first team meeting. Okay, that I think is it for the project implementation. Um, I hope that was useful, Asha.
That's really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I already know what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I have a few slides on KTE and dissemination. And I think some of you are working on manuscripts for your projects. So this section will be useful for you. To think about what you're going to be doing for your KTE, and thinking about new and interesting ways to do this knowledge dissemination, especially with the community. It doesn't have to just be manuscripts and conference abstracts. There are, like, we could do a whole talk on knowledge translation and exchange and dissemination, and knowledge mobilization is actually the term that's often used today. There's theories on knowledge mobilization. And so for example, the one that we use, one knowledge translation uh, uh, principle we use is knowledge to action. So that's KTA. It's created by Ian Graham, and used by CIHR. So it's the knowledge to action cycle or wheel. So that and a lot of knowledge translation and mobilization frameworks and theories actually come from adult learning theory, change behavior theories, social marketing theories, diffusion of innovation theories. So, and there's some literature on that. I could really nerd out and talk talk a lot about those theories, but we'll go on to. So for those of you who are writing manuscripts. We have a whole talk on this and that we can do at some point. But here are just a couple of slides for you. Manuscripts are the most important measure of academic research, and we have some people on the call here who've been involved with CHIWOS, and if you can imagine, CHIWOS has 50 to 60 publications over the last decade. That is a huge number, and tremendous. But you know what's important to think about is you write these manuscripts and they go into academic journals, but are they really making a difference at the front line with the people that you're working with or researching? I think that's something we should think about. It's not just about getting the publication or the manuscript. And are we really making a difference at the front line? And sometimes we're not. And actually, there's studies showing that it takes 20 years to go from a manuscript to making a difference to the front line. And a lot of implementation science, which is a field, is looking at how we can speed that up. If you are applying to be an academic, you do want to get high numbers of manuscripts. It is actually quantity over quality, unfortunately. And then authorship is different in different fields. So I'm in the health field and the biomedical field. You can have as many authors as you want. And but in some fields, like let's say economics, it's one author on a paper because it's that one author's theories and new thinking. And then also the order of authorship can become a sticky point. And biomedical research has different authorship rules than social science research. In both, the first author is the most important position, but in biomedical and health research, the last author is the second most important. So let's say your work, Asha, right? You're going to be first author, right? And then, maybe I would be last author. Do you see, right? That's how it goes. And then it goes second author, third author, fourth author. The second author has an important role also. So, and so it's kind of like Scrabble, I don't know if you play Scrabble, but, like the different points depending on the letters you have. So like the first author is like a X, right? And then the last author in Scrabble is like I don't know, like an N. So it has, more points than the second author might be like a T, but the after second author 3, 4, 5, 6 are going to be like E's and A's and S's, which have 1 point. So that's, it's I guess it's kind of hierarchical, unfortunately, and colonizing in some ways, but that's how authorship works in biomedical research. In social science research, so Asha, your research might actually be within social science. You'll have to see, which way or it could actually be in both. But the way it works in social science for authorship is it's in descending order. So the first author is the highest, then the second author, then the third, and so the last author is, which in biomedical research is considered the senior author, is not, it's like the lowest.
Yeah, the person who did the least work.
Yes. This becomes important for like promotion in terms of number of papers you have, your authorship position, and then like actually how many times your paper has been cited or downloaded can get calculated into something called an H factor. Okay. Okay, for those of you who are writing a manuscript, the first thing I typically do, and there's some of you who are, wrapping up your master's and you might be planning to write your master's thesis into a paper. And if you, or maybe you're done that, but the first thing I like to do is to decide which journal I want to apply to, submit to. Because thinking of the journal to submit to, again, it's like there's the audience. You have to think about who the audience of that journal is. Every journal has different rules, and I find it easier to start with the rules and write the manuscript in the rules of the journal you're going to apply to right from the beginning. And how do you pick your journal? You look to see, like when you do your literature review, where are the articles that you're going to be putting your background published? So, that's usually a good tip. And in fact, actually, in your cover letter, you can comment on that in your references, you put articles from their journal. And that can be helpful because you put a cover letter when you do your manuscript submission. So pick a journal. I cut and paste actually the instructions into a Word document. And now actually I put some of the instructions right into, I start actually with a manuscript skeleton, which is, I have the front page, the title page, and then you'll have your abstract. And then you'll have your introduction, your methods, your results, discussion, and then acknowledgements and references and so forth. And I put actually the instructions right into that document. I don't think we have it in the series yet, but if you want me to do a whole session on how to write a manuscript, I think we can probably add that on in August. And but we have a PDF document on how to write a manuscript and a PowerPoint presentation that we can share with you. But for those of you who are writing a manuscript, think about what journal you want to publish in and download, and even a few journals, and we can talk about it. And in the instructions, some important things to look at are word count, and number of tables or figures that are allowed. Okay, I think we're done. I'm going to open it up to questions, and here is a quote of mine from a long time ago, that research is about seeing and framing things that are already there in a new light and doing something that can improve the world around us and having fun doing it. And I really believe in that. So, research is partly a luxury, I think, in today's world. In times of recessions, research funding gets cut. So, we're lucky to be able to continue to do research, and to do so in terms of really improving the world around us. But because it's a luxury, I really think it's often like fun doing it. And if you don't think research is fun and being in this environment is fun, then maybe research isn't for you. But I love it. I think it's so much fun, and working with all of you is really a highlight to me.